Hello, and welcome to the So Emotional podcast. Here on the cast, we discuss everything emotions through the lens of attachment, the nervous system, and internal parts work. We're a little irreverent and like to have fun exploring the emotional issues and dynamics that interest us. So come along and hang out. Let's explore the fascinating lands of emotions.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the So Emotional podcast, where we help remove the stigma and enigma around emotions and the emotional journey. I am Angela Wetzel, founder of Epic Initiator Coaching, and
I'm
this
Nick Carl, founder of Safe Anchor Coaching. Geez, almost forgot my own name. And today we're going to talk about disorganized attachment and fearful avoidant attachment.
Yeah.
Which one should we start with? Is there like
I think disorganized, and then we can talk about fearful because some people, when talking about it, will make this distinction. Some people will put them in the same category. But the way that I like to describe it is kind of like adding an extra layer of attachment bonus
So
icing on
give
top
me
of
a
the
quick recap on what connection is or what attachment styles are.
attachment styles. So attachment styles really just are a reference point to talk about the quality of our bonds, like how we actually attach to or bond to not just our primary caretakers, but those primary attachment figures. So as adults, that would be our romantic partners, but it actually um, it
It's a
applies
pattern
to
that shows up in all directions, right?
yeah, it applies to everything. It's
Everything.
like we are attachment-based creatures. So that means how we attach, like, that plant right there. I have an attachment to this plant. I've selected it. Now it's like to the degree that I am attached to it or what my emotional relationship is with said plant, which sounds kind of weird,
Right.
but
So,
it sort of is that way.
but so there's an emotional component, right? Like in your feelings and stuff. There's also a physical component, right? There's like your proximity to a thing.
Yeah.
Are there any other components besides actual physical proximity and emotional,
Emotion.
or is that, I mean, that's plenty. I was just wondering out loud.
That's a really good question. I've never like thought of it broken down like precisely into how many components of attachment there are, but of course, I would say there's also like a biological physiological component,
Sure.
which may have to do with like hormones,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
kind of thing as well, like pheromones, hormones,
Okay.
chemical bonding.
Sure.
So
Right.
oxytocin, serotonin, whatever
Yeah.
like emotional hormonal
Yeah.
cocktail you're getting.
There's physical adaptations to bonding for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, because like someone who has a more avoidant attachment orientation is going to gravitate towards process or substance addictions in a lot of cases. And likely there's a dopamine or serotonin, like there's a reward that can come from attachment, which can make things kind of challenging because there can be addictions. And with the avoidant attachment, there could be those substance process addictions. And with the anxious attachment, there can be a love addiction component. And
Right.
both are fueled by dopamine or reward responses because it
Mhm.
feels good to get your object of attachment.
So we're talking about attachment, about how we attach to things and our relationship with these things. Now I kind of think of things on like a spectrum or kind of like it's almost a binary, which is like sort of uh just two sides to a coin where there's like, is that right? Yeah. Well, secure and unsecure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. So
Well, do you
let's
want
start with,
me to like go into the umbrellas and just like the categories?
well, what I'm kind of doing, what kind of, I think, just for my own codification too, is like, yeah, kind of an umbrella, like a big picture. Like we paint the big picture and then we kind of drill down into where we're going into disorganized. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
disorganized fits inside this big tent. It fits inside this big tent, and the big tent of attachment and how it's going is like it's either going well and it's happy and fun times and like working really well, and
Mm-hmm.
there's dynamics to that. And then there are patterns. There's specific patterns that show up kind of more often, right? In the insecure side, when things aren't really working, when things aren't as pleasurable. I don't know exactly to say about it.
Yeah. So I'll do a quick like just synopsis of like the main umbrellas. So you could say that there's secure attachment and insecure attachment.
Yes.
So people that are securely attached likely are not here listening because they're happy and being satisfied and completely joyful and ecstatic in their relationships.
Bastards.
People, fuck them. People that are under the insecure umbrella, that just, I mean, what it really means is based on, it's not necessarily a good genetic lottery, more so like you show up and you kind of get what's here,
Mhm.
whatever your parents' attachment style, whatever that environment was like for you coming in will dictate how you attach. So that's
This is
dependent on,
kind of a learned thing, nature, nurture.
yeah, it's more learned like behaviorally. So
Right.
whether how your parents attuned to or responded to you, whether they did or didn't,
Right.
that can really shape your nervous system or your neural expectation.
And then
So
also like your styles aren't like 100% of the time, all the time, right? These are like
yeah, that's the
tendencies.
other thing. These are just more like categories, and I'll talk briefly about that. But under the disorganized umbrella, you have, I'm sorry, the insecure attachment, you have anxious and avoidant.
Hmm.
And so we have podcasts on both of those two. Now, this one, if you have both anxious and avoidant, now you're disorganized.
Mm.
It means you are using both strategies to find safety, meaning that in your home, there was likely some form of relational chaos where you couldn't rely on attachment or bonding to be there consistently. And then there's just a lot of different things that make up how your nervous system responds, meaning there isn't one strategy for you. It's not just like I'm anxious all the time, I'm always afraid of abandonment. It's like I'm afraid of abandonment and I'm afraid of people getting too close.
Hmm.
So this attachment style can feel like existing between a rock and a hard place where it's like
Oh,
come closer, go away, you're too close, that kind of thing. So it's really that push and pull. Now, the thing about disorganized attachment style is people will often come to me and they'll say, I'm pretty sure I'm anxious, or they might say more rarely, uncommonly, is I'm more avoidant with my partners. And really, when we start to drill down into their relationship history, what we find out is that they've actually been playing both roles, sometimes within the same relationship, not really realizing it because they haven't identified with the avoidance stuff because it's sneakier.
hmm.
And usually the anxious attachment stuff is going to bark way, way, way louder. It's going to be a lot more obvious, a lot more painful. So
Hmm.
people are usually motivated by anxious attachment to reach out and get support because it is really hard. So, and then really just fearful avoidant would just be like adding another layer, I would say, on top of that, which is really just having fear introduced into your initial like bond. So if you had a father or a mother or some kind of, figure that was in your home that engendered fear in that attachment, meaning like sometimes they were safe and sometimes they really weren't safe. And that can mean psychological intimidation, that can mean abuse. So just something that really felt like it was threatening to life or limb or existence in some way, or even a threat to someone else in your home. So even if you were never directly hit, and if you saw a parent abuse another parent, then that aggressor would be that fearful attachment origin for you. So yeah, so it's like getting the bonus. You get all the attachment stuff. You win. You win. You've got all the things.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know I've heard you say it, but you know, kind of like what I mentioned before is that like going moment to moment to moment, there's sometimes when you are secure, when you are just yourself, kind of in a middle place, essentially feeling
Yes.
good. right?
Yes.
And then you can have times when it's like you are feeling very anxious and very needy and like desperately wanting to get closer. And sometimes you're just like, you get away from me, right?
Yeah.
But that I've heard you say that it really you think that it encompasses more people than you think.
Yeah, I
Just
have my own theories because just from doing this work for a while, but also understanding like the law of polarity, for example, and also the more you drill down into the attachment styles. Okay, I always use this with my clients, so I'll just whip out my little pen here. So imagine this is a pole.
okay.
So in disorganized attachment, let's say on one side you have avoidance and on the other side you have anxiousness. Well, inside of an anxious person, they're actually avoiding their emotions and they're trying to get love externally from the avoidant person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like they're attracting who they actually are inside,
Okay. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then the avoidant person is attracting their opposite. So while they're internally very anxious, which they will often use substances or process addictions like gambling or working to really kind of quell or soothe that anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
they are pushing away the external partner very much like how they're pushing away their internal feelings. So neither party is really actually necessarily good with emotions.
Right.
They're both actually kind of avoiding or pushing away. But it's like, while one person is on this end, they're like, ooh, gross. And this person is like, oh my God, I really want to be with this. But when it comes sometimes to their own emotions, they're like, you know.
Right, right, right.
So it's almost like they are the same person in some ways,
Just reflecting each other.
just kind of reflecting.
Weird
And it's
polarity.
like if you keep going down like in the layers, it's almost like they continue to flip and invert on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I know it like gets to be really like almost
Yeah,
like
that's a little abstract.
right. So it just makes me think of like parts work, how there's like fractals,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's like complementary wounded energy.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is because one expression, so if you grew up with a more avoidant parent or unavailable parent, you're going to want to pursue to get that love or attention, right?
Yes.
So you're set up to have that orientation towards being anxious so that you have the energy to pursue when you're not pursued. So that sets up your nervous system in a way to actually feel comfortable and familiar with what's been familial or what's been normal in
Right.
your household to like
Right.
chase what's been unavailable,
Yeah.
right? Even if
Yeah.
it hurts, like even if it sucks, it's like that's kind of what you've been conditioned to do. And then for the avoidant part, that's like either if you just didn't have anyone to really rely on, you just get really used to being by yourself and
Mm-hmm.
figuring things out. It's like a part of you came to realize you could not really rely on anybody
Right.
at all. So you're just like, I'm just going to figure this out myself.
Right. And then a lot of times in those situations, when people do present themselves as a trustable character or avail themselves or open themselves up, it's just like, no, I don't trust that from all the way down deep. Right.
Right, because it's kind of like, well, if I did trust you, you might drop me. So even at like the bottom of it, it's kind of like maybe if you really knew who I was, you would see that like I'm a bad person or I'm a failure or something. That usually kind of tends to be the internal
Mm-hmm.
like identity of
Yes.
those avoidant people. But also it's if someone regularly transgressed your boundaries, that could also
Sure.
form like that avoidant attachment where it's just like you could never really say no or you didn't know what boundaries were and it's like feeling of being overwhelmed again and again. So that would naturally make you just want to push away and be like, go away, get away. Or
Mm-hmm.
if you had a parent that was like super emotional and always like projecting or dumping their emotions onto you, which could be part of like enmeshment or parentification or what's considered emotional incest, where emotionally you're not fully developed. You don't really have the capacity to regulate or care for another, like an adult's emotions. And you have an adult here talking to you about some deeper emotional stuff that you just, it's like if they're not okay and they're like dumping their stuff onto you, like as a child, you're like, I'm fucked. Like, whoa. I'm supposed to tell them everything's going to be okay
Right.
as the child, you know, and then that kind of sets up a crazy problems, a lot of problems with intimacy, basically, and emotional intimacy.
Right.
Intimacy. So, yeah.
So in my life, I think it's pretty easy to say that I am a disorganized attachment style type person. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the story of my life, I just thought it was all, I guess, peaches and roses and like fairy tales and knights and princesses and queens and love. And once I found somebody to love, like that was it. That's all you had to do. That was really the holy grail. All you had to do was find somebody to love, and then poof, right? Happiness and pure happiness, right? And
Joy.
there was a moment of like frolicking through flowered meadows, right? Like there was a high the first time that it happened in my life, of just
Mm-hmm.
pure ecstasy. It really didn't last that long. And it wasn't until fast forward, which in this part sucks. Fast forward like 15 years or something or 20 years when now it's like, okay, I've been through this process over and over and I had to go through these patterns a
Mm-hmm.
bunch. And the whole time, especially at the beginning, when I was a kid, 18, 19, 20, all through my 20s, really, whenever a thing would happen, I would just take my emotions that presented in my being at face value, be like, I don't like this person anymore. I'd go away and be like, I can't stop thinking about them. I want to get back with them, and then I would, and then, and then I would, you know, God bless the people that I, put through this spin cycle, but it's like, it's closeness.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would like my insides would turn around and it's like, nope, I'm headed the other direction. And I did that a bunch.
Mm-hmm.
And really, it put me into like a crazy making place. It was just like, I don't get it. I don't understand. And I
Mm-hmm.
also, I think one of the important pieces that I put together that it makes a lot of sense now, but it's something that we talk about it, which is we talk about enmeshment, right? Because like here I am, 18, 19, 20. I just think that whatever's coming to me as far as information and feelings is just a direct reflection of what is here now, right? I just think it's a reflection of the here and the now. But what attachment styles and all this information and the things that we've learned through science tell us is that not so fast. It's like when you come into a situation, when you come into a relationship, at really any point in your life, you are really bringing your entire history and what you deeply believe in your body and in your mind and deep in your emotions to the situation, right?
Right.
So our friend Angela here likes to say the quote. So
Yeah, it just happens to be my favorite quote of all time. But until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate, which
okay,
is a really famous Carl Jung quote.
right.
And I mean, it's true. It's like we have this conditioning. It's kind of like being a fish in water and not really knowing that you're swimming in water. It's just kind of
Right.
taking it for granted that all of your life experiences up to this point have shaped you. And now you have neural expectation. Your nervous system has
Yes.
expectations of how your relationships are going to go, or like how confrontation is going to go. It, pardon, is confrontation safe for you? If you get into a relationship, a close, like in close proximity, if you are committed to someone, then there are expectations about how that goes based on what you saw modeled for you growing up. Did commitment go well for your parents or not? What did fighting look like? What did rupture and repair look like? Was there ever repair? Were there apologies? Like, there's so many different layers. Like, how did they interact with each other? How did they interact with you? How did they interact with your siblings? How did your siblings interact with you? Did they do anything to intervene when your siblings interacted with you in XYZ way? So there's so many different layers. I think it's like this common metaphor that they use in like Chinese like proverbs or just something where they consider a child to be like a blank piece of paper, and then every single life experience, every interaction is like a crayon
Mhm.
or like a color that's being moved across it. So if you consider that our nervous systems, let's say we're like a rock in in a body of water, it's going to depend on the environmental conditions, the speed and the momentum of water, and like how you're being shaped over time. It's like our nervous system is being shaped over time by all of those external circumstances and that environment. And then it's like we get to a certain place in life where it's, well, that's really not the best metaphor because like rocks are kind of somewhat stable and we're a lot more dynamic. Like, thankfully, attachment is plastic. It's like neuroplasticity. You can actually change your attachment. But basically, until you have awareness of what all these stories and ideas and expectations are, then you're becoming more and more aware of like those fears or what you really expect to happen. And the more that you work with those things, you can be like, okay, well, is this true that this thing is going to happen like I think is going to happen? And the answer is like no, because we can't fucking predict anything. Like, we don't fucking know what's going to happen. But we can create from those fears. If we let those fears try to predict the future, those are the things that become like the self-fulfilling prophecies that like you and I like. I feel like we always end up kind of talking about these things when it comes to attachment. So yeah, until you know what your attachment stuff is, you are likely to repeat the same thing, or because most people, oh yeah, I didn't go into the theory of why I say most people I think are disorganized or what the deal is, but you'll likely ping pong from what your relationship felt like emotionally with one parent to the other, or some dynamic of that where it's like you just go back and forth between two things. Like, you go to the rock and the hard place, and then you'll just go back and forth, like trying to find a solution because your nervous system thinks that there's only really two options on the menu. And maybe there's as many as like four options, but it's definitely not an infinite number of options.
Right.
So that makes attraction and attachment kind of tricky if you don't understand what your original like attachment maps are, because we are sort of contained inside of these labyrinths of our own making, right? Staying within the walls and just doing the same thing over until we realize like, oh, there's other options. But there's kind of like an audacity that comes with even being able to ask like, is this all there is? Or is that kind of relationship that I want even possible? Which is like a beautiful and brave question, because when you've never seen it and you've never experienced it, it might as well be like,
Yeah, Candyland, man. Like,
yeah, it's some kind of fantasy. Like, could I actually be happy in relationship? Could I actually be satisfied? Is that possible to feel good like 90% of the time?
so I think my own childhood ideas of love were pretty bucolic, just storybook kind of shit, But in this relationship, which ended up lasting many, many years, for better or for worse, um, it became clear the thing that really started to become shiningly clear was the push pull stuff. It was that closeness only engendered me wanting to be away. And when I was away, I only wanted to be close. And it didn't take very long for me to realize that like that was nuts. It really was nuts. Because I just knew I would be sitting on the sidelines away from this person, like dying, just anything to get closer, right? It
Mm.
was it would be killing me. But I just knew because I'd done it so many times that once I got there, I would think that that was a lie. And I was just like, holy shit. So like that ends up like wrapping up. And I didn't like pull anything away from that. All that it really did to me was became another kind of like childhood conclusion. So it's like when things happen to children and they don't understand, they usually have a conclusion of that like there's something wrong with them.
Mm.
In this
Mhm.
case, I did the same thing as like a 20-year-old, right? 20 to 25-year-old, which was that I fucked up, that there's something wrong with me. And that though I did really like being attached with somebody, there was a bunch of things that I liked. I also knew that I didn't like it or I couldn't handle it. And so fast forward, right? Had, a few more relationships that follow the same pattern. And it was always funny because like maybe a few years would go by and I would just kind of forget about that stuff. And it's like,
Mhm.
oh, I've grown up. I'm growing out of this shit. Like it's just like I'm just me. And we're back to the whole space of like we're just here in this bubble in this box and everything is just sort of neutral and I'm a neutral person and I don't bring anything to this interaction. But then once again, sorry, it's just like it precipitates, it comes out of the sky in the exact same pattern, in the exact same way. And then it's like, holy shit, holy shit, right?
Yeah.
And then the last time that the last time that it happened, um, so I'm 42, so this is like 6 years ago. Like I kind of like had a mini meltdown, right? Especially on the way out because it was like almost brain breaking because it's like, no, this I like this person, I like this situation, but some part of my nervous system, and it really was nervous system level. It was like I was deeply, deeply uncomfortable and scared with where I was, and I had to go, right? And it was at such a deep place. Like I started having tons of like sleep disruption, and like my nervous system got way out of whack, road rage, and just like I was boiling and like falling apart. And so I went away again, back into safety.
Right.
And that's when I started to dig in with the help of a coach to my own emotional state, right? Now I don't I wonder what it is. Like if you could say like what is somebody's emotional acumen, emotional sort of like sense, deep emotional sense and understanding and being with themselves and their own emotion. Like in general in our country, I think I give the score of in general of people being able to be with and to feel their own emotions a pretty low score. In fact, I think that like knowledge and understanding and experience of your own deep, deep emotions and about the emotional sea that we swim in every day, just a general like society-wide knowledge is
Mm.
like exceedingly low, right? Like it doesn't exist. But
Yeah.
here's this force, because it is a force, which is incredibly strong, which is incredibly important, and which can become incredibly unseen and unfelt. It can become divorced from us. Like it moves us every day. It is maybe the seed of every action, right? It is maybe the cause of almost everything, except we can be divorced from it. We can be disconnected from it, right?
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what your opinion is. Like maybe it's like it's a one for one kind of thing, but do people with disorganized slash insecure attachments, are they necessarily disconnected from their own emotions, or do they have, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I have found that across the board, there is usually some level of emotional abuse that they've endured. So there is almost like no skill set around how to soothe or regulate those emotions either alone or with a partner. So
Mm.
it's like they may have awareness that there are emotions, and they may even, like in my case, like I used to feel all the time. I used to feel so much. I thought that meant I was feeling my feeling. Like I was aware of them, I shall say.
Right.
Right. So we can take awareness of our emotions to mean that we are feeling them. Like, yes, I feel them inside. They feel awful.
Hmm.
Right. Like
Right.
I am feeling them, quite literally feeling them. But it's almost like as if you were to have a screaming child in the back seat of your car. You just like drive around and you never respond to it, but you're like, I'm very aware that this shit's going on in the back and it's very
Right.
annoying to me. And
Right.
also feeling potentially powerless or angry or all these emotions towards it, but never actually doing anything, like knowing that you could pick up that baby in the back seat, like
Mhm.
pull the car over and like take it out of the car seat and like hold it and say, hey, I've got you now. Right. But I think that there's just, when there's no modeling around that, it's like not knowing how to, not knowing how to like interface with ourselves. There's like almost a complete sense of being enmeshed or blended with ourselves so much that we just believe that we are a unified mind, like Dr. Richard
Right.
Schwartz talks about, like that there's this myth of a unified mind, which we are not, that there are many parts. And
Mhm.
so if we never question our like consciousness or the quality of consciousness,
Right.
then we don't ever get to separate and like witness ourselves. So we
Mhm.
don't actually create what I would call like duality, because I think it's very important in order to take care of those emotions that we first must witness them, and then we must know how to take care of those emotions and parent them. But the challenge there is like not even knowing that you can do that or what it
Right.
looks like.
Right. Right. Right.
So the people that come to me again and again and again, and I would guess the same for you, is that they are more than likely disorganized and more than likely, for me especially, fearful avoidant. But that makes a lot of sense for me because that's what I've healed through myself. Like I've done a lot of healing. And it's interesting, just like listening to your experience of your own attachment like journey, where it was like you were kind of recreating the same thing.
Hmm.
Mine was a little bit different in some ways because I usually ended up on the anxious part of the spectrum. Even if I was more counter dependent or avoidant, like in the beginning, right? I would just be like, no, no, I'm super cool, like whatever. But it was like no awareness around that. Like I would just kind of push people away. And then if they were to be like, okay, bye, then it would like trigger the anxiousness in me. And I'd be like, never mind, I was kidding, right? And so I always just identified with being just completely anxious. But like I didn't even have an awareness of having any kind of attachment stuff, period. Um, until like until like I was getting divorced, like maybe after that, that there was even, I mean, like I was kind of aware that there was enabling and some codependence, some like fucked up stuff going on, but
You just took whatever happened as yourself, right? This is
yeah,
me.
totally.
I
Yeah,
am.
there was no awareness. Like there was no awakening moment for me until some of that stuff that like precipitated the divorce. Like then it was like a lot of serious shit that happened. And then there were many more major wake up calls that happened to like snap me out of things, like
Mhm.
maybe more than most people, I don't know. um, but then what was interesting is I feel as though I was not aware about my own avoidant attachment as much and how deep it ran until well, of course, like when I started studying this, I was like, okay, yes, I became more aware.
So do you
But
think in your manifestation that the avoidant usually comes on the front side of a relationship?
so
Yings, or is it?
yeah, so my own theory with it um was that what was my theory? My theory was that usually counterdependence would be the first layer.
Which is like, I don't need you.
Right. So, because I view counterdependence as an avoidant mask, which is over anxiousness. So, if you have an anxious strategy, if you're anxious all the time and then you get rejected for being anxious, you're
Right.
still fucking anxious, but you're like, I'll never let you know. Fuck you. Like, I will die on this hill. I'm too cool. I don't need you. Right.
Cool. Okay.
So, my theory was that you would first remove or move through that counter dependent stage to be very honest with the anxiety that existed there.
See.
Then, after healing through that anxiousness, then you would move into dealing with whatever avoidance shit you had. And I'm trying to think if that goes along with
When you say you had, do you mean I had? Or what? Who's the you?
wait, sorry, what for
You-
what?
You're talking about somebody else, but are you talking about yourself? I'm curious.
In what regard? Just like how the healing process works?
Yeah, but this is the healing process for who? Like what type of
Oh, no, for people, for healing attachment,
okay. So
healing
counter
attachment.
dependence, get over
So
that.
if there's any counter dependence at all, then
Okay.
that needs to be, I believe that is like one of the first things that has to be addressed.
Sure. Okay.
Because so basically, okay, so I didn't go into this before, but I personally believe that humans are disorganized.
Okay.
Because attachment, like those fears are rooted in what I would call just basic human fears, that all humans have those fears. We all have abandonment fears to some degree, depending on whatever phase in life we are. Likely, the more vulnerable we are, the more susceptible or fearful we would be of abandonment, right?
Okay.
So that would be like if you married someone and now you're in a foreign country and it's not your country, like holy shit, right? You might be anxious where you were never anxious before,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Or if you are weakened from a disease, like now you're in a vulnerable state, right? So I believe
Yeah.
that we can
Vulnerability. Yeah.
have, yeah, we can have those attachment fears flare up at any stage,
Okay.
depending on the potential ramifications of like that thing happening, like actually being abandoned,
Sure.
right?
Okay. Sure.
So, as a very young child, super dangerous. As a very old person who needs care and assistance, super dangerous, right? So, I think that our attachment style is always going to change given the circumstances. So, it's a dynamic thing, it's not a linear thing.
Right.
It's
Okay.
not just like, I used to be this way, now I'm this way, but I
Right.
just think it's like, it is a continually moving thing. And then
Whatever's happening in your life at that moment.
yeah. And then it can just get more complicated based on like whatever unhealed, unprocessed relational traumas you have. And almost everything is relational, it's experiential, it's happening in relationships. So the other side of that, the avoidance stuff, is like um, people blowing past your boundaries. That's a different kind of powerlessness. That's saying, I am powerless to have what I want, or I'm powerless to say no, right? And or it's also, I'm trying to think of the other part of it, it can be like that feeling of overwhelm and failure. So I just think it depends on where we are in our life and what those circumstances are. So
But you mentioned counter dependence first, and you think that that's kind of like the lowest hanging fruit, or kind of like the thing that needs to be addressed
right,
first.
right, yeah. Okay, so did I explain, I wanted to make sure I explained that idea before I went back into my like other theory about counter dependence. um Yeah, so I don't know if I fully explained this as well as to as like the argument for avoidant attachment, but depending on the circumstances in our lives, I think it's normal for people to still have those same fears about people like getting too close to them, whatever those power dynamics are.
Okay. Sure.
So, yeah. And I had like a whole chart on like the different fears and their basis. But anyway, so that's why I think like all humans have all the different attachment stuff because they're all based on just like normal human existential fears.
Right. Right.
Um, yeah, and then it's really just more of like a spectrum, more of like a dynamic, multi-dimensional graph than it really is one style or the other.
Right. Like A
Right.
to B to C.
And then it's more like the more time we spend in securely attached energy or securely attached behaviors could indicate that like 55% or more of the time, if I'm pretty well regulated, meaning I feel safe within myself, I'm able to regulate myself. And when I'm with others, I'm able to share my boundaries, say no, say yes. And I am able to regulate or co regulate, then I would likely identify that person as more securely attached.
Mhm.
And then if a person is like hanging out in all these different insecurely attached behaviors, like more anxious and avoidant, fears, and really it's just like being dysregulated more of the time, right? So really it's like the more trauma you have, the more likely you are insecurely attached and have disorganized attachment.
Right.
And I don't know. I just don't know if attachment is one of those things that is, if it's insecure, if it's incredibly organized. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's kind of like the nervous system is having to move around. But anyway, back to your question about counter dependence. So, um, gosh, I'm trying to see if I can explain this well in a way that makes sense. But I think that based on how our nervous system is formed, I think that avoidant and anxious strategies are probably like the two primary strategies that may show up.
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
And then if someone is more predisposed to having that anxious attachment, let's say, and then they become like abandoned or punished because of that behavior, then I think they can adopt another secondary strategy over one of those, over the primary strategies of anxiousness or avoidance, which is to like layer that avoidant mask. So it's like a way of coping with the anxious
Hmm.
strategy that's there.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like if you're looking at a human and this is their original trauma, right? So then they have a strategy. Let's say that strategy is anxiousness, and then that shit doesn't work. They're going to go out another layer and create another protection. Like that didn't work, so now I'm going to do this. And I think it can be kind of layered like that. So whatever is on top is what we want to deal with first to start moving backwards or down through the layers.
And so in this case, in terms of the counter dependence, and I've absolutely been in this place, because I
Mhm.
do think, especially in the beginning, my first strategy is anxiousness, or it's, I don't know, strategy is sort of a weird word. I think it's almost an energy. It's an animating energy, like in my being of my nervous system, right? And the core message of that is just get closer, get closer, get closer, get closer, get closer, right?
Mhm.
And then, of course, I think, there will always be kind of like this from the other side, right? From your partner, there'll be this like kind of like this whoa moment or something, right? There'll be like
Mhm.
a, slow down there, cowboy.
Why are you coming at me with your straw trying
Yeah,
to suck all the
you're
life?
over your skis, right?
Yeah.
And then here's the next strategy, which is like be cool. Like I don't, yeah, okay. I don't need to, I don't need to deal with
I'm
that.
good.
You
Yeah, I'm
just do
good.
whatever you want to do. I guess it doesn't really matter to me. Um, and I remember, dude, even this is a couple of years ago, but uh, I did that, like employed this thing. I had spent so much time like focusing on my own avoidant tendencies where I hadn't really delved in, and I had was out of the dating pool for a long time. This is a pretty sort of interesting novel experiment at the time. But my anxiousness went pretty hard, pretty fast. It was a lot of energy and emotions to deal with. And then the counter dependence, where it was like, oh, I'm cool, whatever, that doesn't really matter. But what it did was it kind of like it short wired having boundaries because there was no boundaries, you know. And
Explain that.
so it was like relationships ending, you know, and it's
Yeah.
like it's time to sort of like move on. And if I was like had any kind of like self-protection, if there wasn't a a absolute abundance of anxiousness, right? And uh then I would have just been like, okay, cool, good, nice knowing you. Take care, have fun, right?
Mhm.
But I tried to, it was like the strategy was sort of like I played it off to be cool and just be like, oh, okay, yeah, we can be friends and still like talk every day and like, do this
Oh,
other
I see what
thing.
you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah. So because if you're not really feeling your feelings, you're not able to be really honest about what you actually want. So you're not expressing that. So then
right,
there's no advocating for those emotions. Therefore, there's like no boundaries around what's okay and what's not okay.
right. And that only took my nervous system to the moon. Like I just
Right.
started having like all these like it was like brain fog that would just get super hard. I could almost not talk because of like how bent into a pretzel like all this energy was in my body. It was pretty
Would
intense.
you say that the counter dependence then caused, like that being a protection, kind of accidentally, unconsciously was causing this like self betrayal
Oh,
to the
absolutely. Yeah.
nth degree that then actually exacerbated the
Yes.
anxiousness that was there,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
right? So then it just,
Yes, it essentially just exploded. Not that I physically exploded. It was just like it was being put in a like a pressure cooker,
right.
like, being caught in the trash compactor in Star Wars. It was just like it
Yeah.
was it was
So
it was incredible. It was incredible. I'll have to give it. It was a wonderful creation.
what I am wondering is, have you, okay, since we're talking about disorganized attachment, and usually I think always or almost always I've seen the layer of counter dependence that's over the top of that anxiousness that's there. Have you experienced the difference between, like, energetically? And I say strategy because I mean it's how you find safety to regulate. So it's like when you were saying get closer, like that's the anxious strategy,
Right.
right? So I'm wondering if you have an experience of feeling the difference between counter dependent energy and avoidant energy.
Not as distinctly, right? Because I am extremely familiar with avoidant energy for sure, right? I'm also familiar with like the kind of the boundary when that flips in or flips on, turns on, and the whole thing turns around. I know precisely, I think, where that exists. The counter dependent part, in at least in my body and being and mind and experience, is trickier because it goes
Mm,
in and out a little bit more seamlessly. Like I don't have a good of grasp or a good sense of when it's being embodied, right? Like it's like I feel like I'm very enmeshed with it's just, oh, that's just me and that's just my personality. I'm cool because I'm cool all the time, and I don't have any vulnerability really. I'm pretty just like,
pretty cool.
I'm pretty just amazing and completely stable.
Yeah.
No.
It is
No,
interesting
no, not really.
because the counter dependent stuff is pretty sneaky, and so is avoidance stuff. Like I find them to be sneakier than the
Yeah.
anxious stuff because the anxious stuff is so vulnerable. It's so very vulnerable. It's just like that is like the anxious free fall.
Yeah.
It's the worst. It's why people really reach out and get help because it's fucking awful.
Mm.
It's horrible. The avoidant stuff, like I feel like if someone is more avoidant, they can pretty much skate by their whole life
Sure.
without necessarily having um the rude awakening experiences like needed to be like, I should really change something because it's almost like, no, I'm good. I don't necessarily need humans so much. I've got
Also, that there's like there's a modicum of safety in it. Like, don't we all want to be safe? Well, guess what? I feel pretty good sometimes, or more safe when I am
right.
not in the presence of somebody else or having to rely on anybody else.
Yeah.
And like I
Mhm.
think it's easy to say like, yeah, people aren't safe. Well, duh, didn't you know that?
Yeah, duh. Like, shouldn't I just hang out
Right.
by myself? And yeah, it's like, and the other thing is like it can be kind of confusing because what we're talking about is like unhealthy polarity, like unhealthy extremes of attachment, where if someone is truly interdependent, they're actually comfortable being by themselves and enjoy their time and space. It doesn't necessarily make them avoidant and enjoy that closeness and want to be close to people. And that doesn't necessarily make you anxious.
Right.
It just depends on what's actually driving that
Right.
behavior.
Right.
Is it fear driving that behavior or is it like love and inspiration? So if the quality of that energy is driven by fear, I need to get close or I need to run away, then it's like that's what we're looking at healing.
Inside of my own avoidant energy, one of the things that I've found out, right, that I began to do in almost every single relationship was that I started to make a sometimes conscious, sometimes not conscious, but list of things that I didn't like.
Yeah, super cool.
And uh, I I never would have second guessed that before, that the reason, the driving reason, right? That there was a driving reason that why would anybody make a list of the things they didn't like about somebody? Why would anybody do that? There's a reason. There is a reason because there's an underlying
Yeah,
assumption.
to build up evidence to make a case as to like why this person isn't good or safe. And like maybe
Right.
that gives you an out to be like, oh, it's
Well,
not.
I think there's already a presupposition in that case, which is like, okay, here we are in this relationship. Well, if you, when you start making lists, you've already presupposed that like, A, it's probably not going to work. And there's probably going to be a part where you're going to need some shoehorn leverage. And in your own mind, in your own being, this at least is the way it worked for me. It's like, and
Mm,
that was super sneaky, like that deep realization that like it's not, which I think that has to be what it is. So like a list of things to keep me safe or whatever it was, but it ends up being
or for you just to have your out to be like, look, I've got reasons,
yeah. And
you know?
then, but it was so funny though because when so the Rubicon, at least the place I see where it starts to work, is intimacy. Right, that is the line. Right, that I would go from anxiousness, wanting to get closer and closer and closer. And then there's some line, right? And it's not always super clear what the line is. Maybe it's like, maybe it's time to move in, right? Maybe it's time to
Mm-hmm.
call ourselves like really boyfriend and girlfriend or something like that. Some kind of like arbitrary
Different line for everyone,
different
marriage
line
or
for everyone.
children or the
Right.
house,
Or yeah, or, there could even
the
be stuff
second home, the
like,
vacation home.
yeah, or like I can feel that same stuff like inviting somebody into my own space, you know? It's just like when there's vulnerability on on tap or it's just in the mix, I go to the strategy, right? Which is it's all laid out, which is so like which is so crazy, but it is so subtle in how it works, right? And this is where we get back to the quote, till you make the unconscious conscious. So here are unconscious things, and I only came across this because of how many times it repeated and how many times I got to see it, and then also just like working on it and working with myself. It was with a coach or therapist, when he confronted me and said, "Hey, what do you think about me?" Right?
Mm,
And he asked for the inside baseball. And that was terrifying because I kind of knew right away. I was like, oh, because I was actually thinking about firing him. I was just like, yeah, this guy sucks. He's like 3 minutes late every time. It's expensive. I was making my list, right? Because in this therapeutic relationship, we were approaching intimacy. Like he's going to find out, right? This is internal stuff. He's going to find out
What was he gonna find out?
that I'm terrible, right?
That
That
you're a
I'm
bad person, right?
a bad person, right?
Which is usually avoidance stuff.
Right.
Go on.
Um, so he confronted me, and my first instinct was to lie because I clearly saw this delineation between like inside world and outside world, and I was about to bring inside world to the out. And my thought was that like, well, once I utter these words, we're never going back. I can't ever take this back. The stuff that's on the inside, it felt so hidden and so raw. Um, but I was just like, fuck it. What do we got to lose? And it ended up being really cathartic, right? Because he just accepted me, right? He just accepted it. And then and it also just allowed so much clarity to come in about how scared I was. And then it was just like this, like relaxing. It was like, oh, yeah, God, I really hate your guts. That I didn't, but I was just scared. I was scared. I was frightened. And it was just cool to see that. And then to have that realization, like, holy shit, I do that with almost everybody in almost every situation. That here I am, like, I'm just waiting to like use my list of things that I hate about this situation, person, place, or thing to shit on it and get out of there, which is a whole, it's an entire strategy, right? So we talk about like these patterns showing up in all these different places. Well, here's one of my basic patterns. Like I show up, I assess the situation. When they start to get close to who I actually am, puts me actually in danger, I'm going to employ my list as a shoehorn to say, like, look, I've already made a list of why everything here is terrible and I'm fucking out of here.
Right.
Yeah. And
Beat
I've
you to
done that.
it.
Yeah. And I've done that in my life hundreds of times,
Yeah.
which is like, it's not, it's not a, it's not a great strategy as far as like, being friendly or building or
Intimacy.
like
Yeah.
intimacy, or the things, if we want things to last, if we want things to stick around, it's not,
Right.
it's
But
not,
it is a strategy for that younger part that doesn't really know it's safe to have that reason to run away or place to go to prepare oneself for, the inevitable or whatever it
Mm,
expects, right? Um, yeah, it's really fascinating. But what I was gonna say when I was talking about my own attachment stuff is like it wasn't really until I started my business that I started to really understand my avoidance stuff. Because it was like not being comfortable with being responsible for other people, people getting close to me, people relying on me. Like it was almost this like people claustrophobia. So early in my coaching, I had to be really honest with my own discomfort of people getting close to me.
mhm,
Then I would be like, like noticing my own bandwidth for being able to support people. And it's interesting because it wasn't necessarily their emotions, but it felt like the expectations,
mm,
right? Um, yeah, so that was really like eye-opening for me. And then wherever we go, there we are. Like also it was showing up a lot with money too, avoidance. And there's a saying, I don't know where it comes from. I remember hearing Maston Kipp say it, and ever since I heard him say it, it always just I'm like, huh, that's so interesting. Money is mom. But I really do think money is like both our parents, like how we relate to money
sure.
has to do with attachment, like our attachment style. But yeah, in some ways, it's definitely tied to mom and allowing that nurturing or what that relationship was like with mom then it's like, are you cool with having money come close to you? Are you cool with having people come close to you? And also just like with avoidance, it's like kind of noticing how you deal with other people's emotions. So if
Hmm.
someone's coming at you and they're very vulnerable and you're like, you know, it's a little bit of like an avoidant response to be like, oh, nasty, like
Right.
it's gross and like weak, you know. But it's also interesting because in some ways, like attachment is, um, I don't know how to explain this exactly, but there are just some very instinctive, like natural aspects of attachment and bonding. Like it's kind of important that we know where we are in time and space, like proprioception or interoception, and how, yeah, how we're feeling on the inside, but also like what our capacity is to give, to really give in a moment. So it's like in nature, when there are sick or wounded animals, like the rest of that pack or group isn't always going to be able to slow down or do what's needed for that animal. Like sometimes they just have to move on and leave it behind. And so in some cases, it can feel like, oh, that's so cruel. But in other ways, if you choose to take on another person's energy when they're very anxious or they're not able to regulate themselves, in some way, it's like entering into a codependent relationship where maybe you have a savior complex or you want to save them so they can save you, or if you save them then maybe you can get love. But without those considerations, like some of those feelings that we have are really just letting us know what our own energetic boundaries or resources might be. I don't know if I explained that well, but I guess what I'm trying to say is like, based on the anxious avoidant relationships, like there's this common sentiment among the anxious types because like they feel so hurt by the avoidant, you know,
Hmm.
like fuck you, you're a fucking asshole, like, and really like harshly judging that avoidant in a lot of ways, wishing that they had those qualities of the avoidant, almost like I wish I didn't care the way you don't care.
Right.
But it's just interesting because it's a convenient projection to blame someone else for
Sure.
you opting into that relationship, which is perpetuating the cycle that your nervous system expects, which is you having to chase love that you can never get. And the irony is that you're the one doing that to yourself and they're just showing you what you're doing to yourself because you're the one opting into that, right? And that's like a really hard pill to swallow. Like it's not comfortable. And the reason why I like say that so bluntly is because like I've put myself in that
Oh,
position.
sure. Yeah.
And that's how I really feel like my own like what's the word? Not like street cred, but like the moment where I felt like, okay, I feel like I've kind of hit this place where I feel like, yes, I can absolutely coach people through this attachment and relationship stuff, is because like I walked away from a relationship when I was in love. Like I was madly in love. And I walked away because it wasn't honoring me anymore.
Hmm.
So I'm like, if I can do that and I can be honest with myself to that degree and be able to walk away even though I'm in love, then I feel like I've kind of walked through the fire, had that rite of passage, and that way I'm not just like telling people. I mean, I really don't just like tell people like, yeah, you should leave, or I don't really give them that advice, but I will explain to them like if they have found themselves in a relationship where they feel powerless, you may want to consider like why you're giving your power away, because there is a choice, but it's complicated because it often feels like this choiceless choice. It kind of feels like, oh, I
Right.
don't really have a choice because I'm in so deep, or I really love this person. And it's kind of like, well, there's a degree of honesty that we need to have with ourselves, um, to be clear about what we're actually choosing, whether we're aware of it or not.
I hear you. That is like, you know, going back to the like what's the emotional, IQ of the standard person,
Right,
Like
but there's, yeah, and but there's no, yeah, until a person like has an awakening, or who knows like what that event is where there there's an introduction of more consciousness, so they're able to be like, wait a second, like this sucks, like
right,
does this have to be this way, or I'm in so much pain, like I need help, clearly I can't see shit, or somehow they're in pain, so they're going looking for answers. And then it's like that appeal to consciousness no longer, like, you can't really appeal to like the unconscious part, because that part is more like, I want to say hidden, and I don't,
right.
we're not, I don't exist. Shh, like this isn't happening. Shh. But it's like appealing to the part that wants to become conscious in a person, right? The call to say like, this is the hero's journey, you're the fucking hero. Are you in, do you want to do this or not? Do you want to reclaim your power, or do you want to be the little girl or the little boy, whatever that meme is, where they have like the boot on their face, and when you zoom out, it's like their hand is inside the boot that's on their face and they're crying.
Yeah,
It's like, you can choose whatever you want, but we're always choosing from our current level of awareness,
sure.
our perspective, whatever that is. And it's just like, life is this consciousness or awareness journey, and it's different depending on where we are. Like, are we in this victimization place, or are we in the empowerment place?
hmm And I do think that like in terms of beginning to, well, want to change your patterns, it's about perspective and consciousness and like wanting something else, right? And so that's why I mean, part of me sure is like kind of pissed off that I felt like I like lost so many years just
Mhm.
being led around by my own tail. I felt kind of gypped by that, Like I
Yeah.
felt like that it took so long. Maybe there's not any other way, or maybe this is, I mean, I don't think probably there is anything else besides perfection. I wish that it wouldn't have taken so long, Uh,
Yeah.
but I can see that time did avail me to some things. I think that my own desire for change also helped, because it sent me looking for uh, avenues and opportunities and also help from people, places, and things.
Mhm.
Um, but I do think that like it is like consciousness and perspective that is like that's the thing that needs to like grow and be cultivated. As far as like tools to begin to uh, behave in different ways. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Wait, what specifically?
Behave in different ways. So if we're behaving in a disorganized way,
Mhm.
and we want to start to think about like what are the kind of the prerequisites to beginning to build something different, right?
Oh, like,
We are habituated from how we lived, right? Our relationships and where we came from.
okay.
Now time's passing, and here we are, and we're struggling. We don't feel that great. Like, so my argument was that consciousness and building perspective is like the raw nuts and bolts
Oh,
guts
I see. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that need to be worked on, right?
Mhm.
And then, this is kind of the stuff that I work on, which is uh, building relationships inside of your own emotional body, right? Because,
Mhm.
like what I said about, which I think is true, is like the general knowledge of the emotional dimension, the emotional realm, right? And so in the work that I do, it's essentially just sitting and experiencing and starting to understand that you can build a capacity to be with very strong things. Like emotions are incredibly strong energies, right? And
Yeah.
they can
Yeah.
be, it absolutely can be incredibly uncomfortable. But
Mhm.
beginning a deep understanding that it actually won't kill you, right?
Right.
And the more that you can begin to be okay with with experiencing the extent of the latent emotion that lives within you, then it can begin to move. It can begin to be seen, right? It can begin to be brought into relationship. And this is a relationship with yourself, right? So it's like, hey,
Mhm.
what you want to know yourself better? It's like, well, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the ocean. So in my case, it, I had this like vision, but it was a literal ocean of energy that lived inside of me. And that when I came face to face with it, it was like it was like a light bulb. I swear to God, it was like a light bulb went off, and it was like, no fucking wonder why I'm bent out of shape. No wonder why
Right. I have
like
this
this thing isn't working.
body of unprocessed, undiscovered,
Right.
unplumbed
It was like in
depths
my
of,
backyard, it was an ocean. It was a literal ocean. And I was
yeah.
like, oh, now feeling an ocean worth of stuff was it was difficult. It is difficult all the time to like understand that that's what's in there. That's what exists inside of my being, right? If
Mhm.
somebody would have told me when I was 15 years old, like, okay, you're a boy, okay, you're human. Here it is. It's 1994 or whatever, It's like, look, you can got Nintendo, okay. Okay, but also inside of you is this hidden amount of energy that is absolutely extraordinary. And when I say extraordinary, I think that it like in your life will have the biggest amount of influence and effect more than anything in the
Anything.
entire world.
Yeah.
Would you be interested in knowing about that, little Nick? And I would be like, what? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
So to me, I think it is that big of a force, right? It's like
Yes.
it's like having a whole nother sense, eyes, ears, nose, mouth. We have our emotional sense that
Mhm.
like those eyes and that knowing of how it actually works and how it influences us and works inside of our beings is that important.
Right. So the challenge is that when we don't know that we are the witness and custodian of those emotions, um, we can feel victimized by them, and then there's an adversarial or aggressor, like perpetrator, victim, like relationship that we have within us, and then I think a large part of our population feels completely victimized by negative emotions because, well, it's not pleasant. And also, it's just one of those things that the more you push it off, whatever we resist persists, it'll just keep coming back, right?
Right.
So it's just like this growing body of unprocessed, unseen, unheard emotions that have been building up. And now it's like panic attacks and serious depression and,
Yeah, and it will
just
grind you down. It will destroy.
chaos and volatility. So, like, to your point, what you were saying, and you said this really eloquently and beautifully, like, and what you asked me, like, I feel like I would be repeating what you said, but just saying it in a slightly different way, which is our work is to, yes, like become aware of those emotional sensations and then to discern, to really get to know like the difference between the vibration of fear and the lower half of that emotional resonance, that ladder, and love, what's on the other side of it, and finding acceptance for all of it because um, I mean, this is how we have human experiences at all. Like how we experience the positive is because there is a negative. It's like these two intermingled uh, aspects, this polarity, these emotional poles. So it's just kind of like understanding where you are emotionally, and then once you have awareness of that, you can kind of know what you're creating because you can create from anywhere on the spectrum. If those emotions are like your palette, or those emotions will dictate as like almost like food or paint what you create with on your canvas. It's like wherever you are, wherever you take action from, those emotions are going to inform your manifestation. So if you have a lot of unconscious stuff, you'll get a manifestation and you'll be like, what the fuck is that? Right? How, like, how is this here? How is all this? It's because there's a lot of unconscious stuff. And the better you get at cultivating that relationship with consciousness, then you can become more intentional. Like it becomes less like post manifestational awareness, like, holy shit, what is all that? How was I involved in that? Like I used to be like, I see it, I don't know what my part in it
How did
is
this
at
get
all. And then you get better, and then you're kind of like, maybe just after you're like, wait a second, I just did this thing and I didn't really like how it went, but now I have more awareness. Or maybe you like catch yourself in the middle doing something,
right?
like feeling that you're avoiding something out of fear. You're either pushing something away or pulling on something, trying to force something. And then it's like getting to know beforehand, like before what you want to create, and you start to use intention. So it's just like they're it's a skill set, basically
Hmm.
skill set
Yeah,
that we have the power to really learn how to use. Like we can be artists with our emotions, and we don't have to be powerless, we can be creative with them
right.
instead of being held down by them.
I just want to reiterate that, like, but the emotional landscape and the emotional, whatever it is, sense, right? That it is almost like a language, that
Yeah.
there's so much dynamics to it, that there are polarities involved in it, right? Like emotions of like it's energy, but there's a lot to it, right? And so it is super cool to begin to learn about those things, begin to like observe them in yourself and also in other people, to
Mm-hmm.
see how it's like playing around.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. The dynamics of emotions, right, is no small thing. I just want to like put an exclamation part on that. And
Yeah, it's no small thing. It's like learning an entire new language, but it's just like not based in what you know as traditional language. It's
right,
like I don't know, it doesn't fall necessarily into the category of like mathematics or
right. Yeah, yeah.
language. It's like a different conveyance of energy. It's just
But
like
but bringing consciousness, bringing knowledge, bringing your awareness into these realms, it really can like fill out this bouquet of all these colors and things that seemingly didn't make sense to me in the past. Like they do have reasons now, right? And though I don't have like perfect domain over them and like I don't have perfect control, like I do have more
yeah,
of a deep understanding or some kind of understanding of what is happening. And that's cool. I just think that that's super cool that like, like that 14-year-old kid, like here's the most important, powerful thing in the world. Do you want to know about it? Well, yeah, it sounds pretty cool. Are you going to tell me? No, we're not. We're not going to tell you about it. You're just going to have to figure that out later on your own. Okay, good luck. Have fun. Do some
yeah,
trigonometry or something.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The other thing I was gonna say, and I feel like I just forgot it completely.
I
Uh,
want a little bit more. You talked about fearful, avoidant, and that
yeah. Well, I was going to talk about that, but I was wondering if we should just do a new podcast, a different
Oh,
podcast with it, just
yeah,
because it can kind of build on this one.
sure.
And yeah, because like I feel like the podcast we did on fear,
Uh-huh.
like ties into that, of course, but it's, yeah, I
Okay.
think potentially its own thing.
Right.
So yeah.
Okay. That was a pretty decent disorganized attachment discussion. You got anything else boiling in your brain you want to this
Um,
with?
I guess the only thing I would just leave with people is just do your best to like have a lot of self-compassion around it because it's like you kind of get what you're given, especially when you're a little being that's entirely dependent on
Right.
adult nervous systems. It's like you did not have a lot of choice in that matter.
Right.
Like it's so important that children, like some of these innate like survival strategies have to do with like adoring our parents and looking up to them and seeing them as like all powerful like superheroes
Right.
and really like because we need to stay there, like we need some form of protection and that's how we survive, but it's like once you become an adult, survival is not going to be enough. It's like the game changes and surviving is now, if you're simply surviving, it kind of becomes like the poison. And now the medicine is actually thriving
Mhm.
and realizing that you have so much power and choice in what you're choosing to opt into in relationships. So if you'll be open to making what's unconscious conscious and asking the questions like, what's in my blind spot? Like I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to see where I've been giving my power away, then that's like the beginning of so much, I feel like.
Right.
It's just like,
It's a whole other
yeah,
world.
it's instead of regurgitating past traumas and just repeating the past again and
Yeah.
again, it's like becoming a conscious creator in your life. And those are vastly different life experiences.
Yeah. There's something too when we can get ourselves out of uh victimization or blame or martyrdom, out of the lower realms of energetic living, that there is a line where it turns into actually creativity. And in
Right.
creativity, it's a whole nother ball game, right? Which is where I think a lot of people would love to be living, even the idea that that could even exist, right? Seems, and even to me,
Yeah.
like a little bit hokey, but, uh, just want to like encourage people to like reach for the stars, that,
Mm-hmm.
that you
Dream
can,
big.
yeah, that you can learn and that you can change, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that like
You can
there,
heal.
yeah, and
It's
there
not
is
always the most comfortable thing in the
uh,
world to feel all of the unfelt stuff, but you definitely get better
there is peace and joy and fulfillment out there, and you can
in
do
there.
it in there. All right, good work. Thank you, Angela.
All right. Thanks for showing up all.
So emotional. Check out our socials. Say hi. Leave a comment. We love you very much.
Bye.
Later.